So this is the introduction to the Renaissance unit that we'll be starting. This is the transition from medieval to modern Europe. So medieval Europe was during the Middle Ages, and you guys learned about that, how it was, especially in the early Middle Ages, a period of disorder and decline where some things that were valued in Roman society, like education, were then neglected. Now, through the Renaissance, we're going to move into a much different period. The Renaissance is a lot of times thought about with art because you had a lot of really famous artists come out of the Renaissance era. You have these wonderful works of art that are still on display today, such as Michelangelo's David or the painting of the Sistine Chapel or the Mona Lisa. So we're going to go and move forward. I'm going to first just give you a brief definition of Renaissance. Okay, Renaissance meaning rebirth. And so the Renaissance that we're talking about refers to a period of about 300 years in Western Europe that marked the revival of art and literature and learning. The Renaissance also has roots in some medieval heritage, especially in terms of learning within a university. And we're going to move on into the distinctive features of the Renaissance. Okay, so distinctive features of the Renaissance, you're going to want to add a little bit of detail to each of these points. So the distinctive features, so you have a rediscovery of Greco-Roman, meaning Greco-Roman civilization, which had been neglected in the Middle Ages. Okay, so you have we're starting to bring back those elements of those cultures that had been neglected in the Middle Ages, prioritizing education, for example. The second feature of the Renaissance is that the Renaissance emphasized reason, or questioning attitude, or experimentation, as opposed to the Middle Ages faith, authority, and tradition. So in the Middle Ages, everything that they thought came from the church. They were taught not to question the church and that the church had the final say. And you're going to move into a very different period here in the Renaissance where people are taught to ask questions, to kind of question what they had been taught for years and years. It was this questioning attitude that's going to lead into the rebirth of learning and culture, also leading into some new experiments, or not experiments, some new inventions as well. So the third feature of the Renaissance is that it glorified the individual and approved worldly pleasures. So by glorifying the individual, we're talking about really prioritizing human needs here on Earth. Those were neglected during the Middle Ages when everything was, you're kind of have a restrictive life on Earth so that you have a great afterlife, and that changes during the Middle Ages. Okay, we want to enjoy our time on Earth now is kind of the thought of the Renaissance. And then your fourth distinctive feature of the Renaissance is that they focus attention on world matters, okay, things that matter to people who are actually living during that time period. This would include things like making money, secularization, so kind of distancing themselves from the church, realizing that education doesn't necessarily have to be tied with the church. So those are some other distinctive features. Focus upon world matters, things that matter in the present. And lastly, the last distinctive feature of the Renaissance is great achievements in literature, art, and science. Okay, we have Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. We have all these great artists and writers coming out of this period. So moving forward, we're going to talk about the Renaissance starting in Italy. Italy is the birthplace of the why it's called the Italian Renaissance. And there's a couple reasons why the Renaissance started in Italy. First, Italy had Roman remains. They had sculptures, buildings, roads, and these Roman remains are going to excite this element of curiosity in the people. Okay, they're going to start to look back at that Roman civilization and think, okay, how can we bring this back? How can we put an emphasis on art and learning and culture and architecture? Also, Italy is located on the Mediterranean Sea. This gives them easy access to trade routes. This gives them access to all sorts of different merchants and people. It's an accessible city. Next, Italy benefited from the revival of trade during the Crusades. So during the Crusades, trade increases because you're fighting these religious wars, but also that's bringing in people from other parts of the world, which means goods are being brought in from other parts of the world. So there was this revival of trade, and Italy had wealthy, influential people who became what are known as patrons. A patron is a supporter. And these patrons were patrons of literature, art, and science. You had some very prominent patrons of art, literature, and science in Italy. For example, the Pope during the time or different popes were patrons. Also, the very famous Medici family in Florence. And Medici is Medici. So those are the people who became the patrons, the ones that are commissioning big works of art and big pieces of architecture to be created. So then after the Renaissance starts in Italy, it spreads. And in the 15th century, 15th century, so we're talking about the year 1400s, Renaissance ideas spread from place to place. They spread from Italy to then France and then German states and then Holland and England. And the reason why the Renaissance is spreading is because of different religious contacts all over the world, different military contacts, and commercial contacts. With the revival of trade, not only are we exchanging goods, but people's ideas are getting exchanged as well. And then the second reason the Renaissance spreads is because you had Northern scholars, people from places like England, that are traveling to Italy to absorb this Italian art and culture and learning. Okay, so they're going to go and study in Italy, and then they're going to bring back that knowledge to wherever it may be that they came from in the north. So there are some very characteristics. So they're very essential Renaissance spirits, or we also call them Renaissance values. And those are listed here. I'm going to explain each one. And the first is humanism. Humanism is a literary movement. Humanism is a literary movement. Okay, so this is going to involve writers. It's a literary movement that began in the 14th century in Italy. And these writers are going to start concerning themselves with everyday human problems instead of religious issues. So they're going to start writing about things that are personally impacting them or their communities. This makes their writings a little bit more appealing. People start to read more of these influential writers and relate to them. Also with humanism, those writers are going to start to draw inspiration from classical Greek and Roman civilizations. They're going to study the manuscripts of these Greek and Roman writers and then base some of their ideas off of those cultures. And humanism kind of leads to this revived interest in literature and writing. You have some really famous writers, Erasmus, Thomas More, and Petrarch, that come out of this era that are very influential. The second Renaissance value is vernacular, or kind of the spirit is vernacular, and vernacular replaced Latin and literature. So this is really important because by using the common vernacular or language of the people, it's going to reach more people. These Renaissance ideas are going to reach more people. So Latin was the language of literature in the Middle Ages, and in in Western Europe. And it's a language that the church uses, and it's the language that educated people use. Everyone else speaks local vernacular, which means that the people who were getting the most information and being most educated were those who spoke Latin. When they start using vernaculars and people start writing using vernaculars, other national languages begin to develop that reached commoners. So the Latin-based languages that developed during the Renaissance are French, Italian, Spanish, and then German and English. I'm sorry, Latin-based languages are French, Italian, and Spanish. The Germanic-based languages are German and English. So you have this vernacular that develops. So next is different inventions that are encouraging the printing of literature. First, in 1450, you have the Gutenberg press, invented by Johann Gutenberg. He's German, and they invent the movable type. This, compared to medieval hand copying of books, they're able to increase printing and increase output, and they're also able to increase the accuracy from text to text, and it decreases cost. This made books more available to people, and it encouraged more people to write. More people reading, more people writing, you have a more educated populace. There are some characteristics of Renaissance art that become very stylistic of this period. The first characteristic is that they imitated Greek and Roman art. You can look at the sculptures, the architecture, there's a lot of similarities. The paintings of Renaissance art emphasized realism, attention to detail, and desire for perfection. So you're going to see a really stark contrast between medieval art and Renaissance art, in that Renaissance art is going to look almost like 3D. It looks realistic. Look at any painting by Leonardo da Vinci, and you'll be able to see this. And third, the early Renaissance painters, they're going to treat these religious themes with a lifelike approach. And then even later Renaissance painters are going to create more realistic works that are showing more kind of like everyday life and worldly subjects. And today, Renaissance art, it continues to evoke admiration. Back in 1967, I think, Da Vinci painting was purchased by the National Gallery in Washington, and in 1967, that painting brought in $6 million. You'll be doing, later on in this unit, you'll be doing a virtual tour of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, looking at many of these different Renaissance works of art. Okay, we are going to stop there for now.